You know, I've heard it said that FESS's manager just saw a guy that was, 6'6", looked great in a coonskin cap, and Walt didn't want to do any more Davy Crockett's. What should we do with him? Let's do Daniel Boone. I loved doing it because it was mostly outdoors, and even the sound stages we had seemed to be outdoors. A lot of animals, and it was a great story, great family story. I mean, yeah, you get paid for playing cowboys and Indians, and in really elaborate styles too. And even when I would go do personal appearances back in North Carolina and Florida and these different places, they'd be parks that had gunfights and fun things. And I always worked it so I wouldn't just have to sit there and sign autographs, and because that's like a kid in school. Oh, you did bad, go sign your name 1,000 times. But I'd say, okay, I'll do that if I get to be in the gunfight. So I got to do a lot of the gunfights and a lot of the really fun things. Well, it was a family show. Daniel always gave Becky a kiss whenever he came back, no matter what was going on. The fort's being attacked, fine, he'd go check on the kids. And another interesting thing, because I just had a wonderful opportunity to sit down with FESS, and we talked a lot about this show. It was really great. A lot of the stories that we did about slavery, about race relations, I mean, it was really groundbreaking at the time, but we could do it in such a way that nobody was preaching, it was just part of the story. There were escaped slaves, there were, we had Rosie Greer, who was an Indian chief, and a lot was Barney Rosenzweig, our producer, and FESS. They just really felt passionate about these subjects too, so they put it in there. But like you say, what I love is it wasn't hitting anybody over the head, and it wasn't saying anybody's wrong. It was just kind of blending it in. When I would go back, like I say, in the summer and do these appearances, I lived on a Cherokee reservation.
So they give you an earful of whether or not you were accurate or inaccurate?
Actually, I'm still doing a documentary on that where we are comparing how the Indians were treated. But yes, of course. And it was fascinating for me to find out, like, a lot of the tortures and even the scalping was really something the white man originated. It was hair buyer, that was the general in the fort that was known as hair buyer, because he would buy the scalps of the frontiersmen that the Indians would give him. And the Trail of Tears, just getting things from the Indians' perspective was really fascinating. And then my mom did a lot in Hollywood to get it to where Indians would actually play Indian roles. Because before then they would always be actors. I mean, there's all different. Rock Hudson, I remember in one movie seeing him play an Indian chief. And she really helped because we really became friends, but she started a whole organization here that really pushed to have Native Americans playing the Indian roles, as opposed to, and it's still one of the greatest lines I heard come out of Ed Ames' mouth. Pat Blair and I went to see him at a show once, and they were kind of teasing and giving him a little bit, and he turned around once and said, "Don't ever mess with a Jewish Indian." No, I think there was a conscious effort in there. And another part of that was that FESS is so tall. He didn't want to seem that tall. So he liked to use, and also he loved sports, but he used a lot of the athletes and a lot of tall people around him. So he didn't seem, he only wants to admit to about 6'5", 6'6". Some people go up to 6'7", but all I know is he was tall. And even when you see the football players and other people around him, you can see that he's still, the big Daniel Boone, who of course was only really 5'8", but that's another story. It's actually a lot of fun. I've been doing a lot of research on Boone. We have a documentary going on about him. Yes, the real Daniel Boone was 5'8", never wore a coonskin cap, didn't like him. Talk about great Indian fighter. He only admits to killing 2 Indians in his life. He was once one of the wealthiest guys around with so many tens of thousands of acres, and yet then he died penniless, not owning any land. Although the house he died in was a nice house. It was his daughter's house. So that's another thing. And the more research I do, the more the experts kind of have different, I mean, you bring up in some places that Jemima might have been illegitimate. And you'll get, oh my goodness, and other people, of course she was. He was gone for 2 years discovering Kentucky. And so there's a lot of really fun things that I'm finding out about the real Daniel Boone. It was fascinating. See, when I was a kid, I was told, yeah, Daniel Boone had 10 kids, but only 2 were legitimate. That's why we only have 2 kids, which of course is nowhere near the truth. Probably all that 20th Century Fox could afford. Because actually for the pilot, there were 3 of us. I was actually the younger Nathan Boone. There was somebody else playing Israel, and then Veronica Cartwright was playing Jemima. And then when we finally started shooting the series, they moved me up to Israel, and it was just the 2 of us. And you want to know something? Mm-hmm. I just found that out. When we had the release of the Daniel Boone DVDs, FESS had a big party for us up at his vineyard. And I got to sit down with Veronica. I'd seen her over the years, but we never really talked about it. But we sat down, we had a dinner together, and she told me that's what happened. Because I always heard that she asked for too much money. And then they sent her off to college. But of course, that's what the producers told my mom and everything, so somebody else wouldn't ask for more money. But all these years, I thought it was just the fact she asked for too much money, and that's why they kicked her off the show. And she goes, no, Darby, it's because I had a little love romance scene on one of the episodes. And Pat thought that it made her look old because I looked old, and so that's fascinating. It's the first time I found that out. Well, of course, I was young. I mean, I started the pilot at 5, so the Davy Crockett, was even before then. I've heard it said that FESS's manager just saw a guy that was, 6'6", looked great in a coonskin cap, and Walt didn't want to do any more Davy Crockett's. What should we do with him? Let's do Daniel Boone. But absolutely, I mean, the coonskin cap craze, everybody was wearing them. I would go around the world and people would recognize and see that. Of course, I had a little trouble with the schools because they would all write, because if you watch the first couple, 3 years, I don't need no schooling. Israel would talk frontier talk. But then all the teachers would write in, our kids are talking like Israel, and you can't. So the last few years of the show, I all of a sudden had impeccable English and talked very nicely. You get these people that come into your home once a week if you're on a weekly series like that, and you feel very close to them. I've kind of been privileged over my long career to have kind of done it. You do the movies, people kind of hold them in reverence and they sit back. You do a nighttime show, people feel very warm and like they almost know you. I did a soap opera for a couple of years. Then you're coming into their home every day. Those fans will get up in your face and tell you what you're doing right and wrong. So it really is, it's the power of the media that you feel that connection. Well, if an actor is doing it right, you feel that connection. It really dawned on me too, the history that was going on, because I was talking to him about Daniel Boone before I went off and shot the documentary. And I started talking about Daniel Boone, America's first living legend, who was famous abroad, And then I realized I'm talking to FESS about it, who's another living legend, and rightfully so. And I was just like, wow, this is one of those magic moments. He is absolutely, he told me one time after the series was over, he was going to run for Senate. I'm like, FESS, you're too nice. Why do you want to go into politics? I do a lot of work now for child actors. I've been on the SAG-AFTRA Young Performers Committee with Paul Peterson, the Minor Consideration, and one I'm very proud of now through the Looking Ahead Foundation. Through the Actors Fund, we have the Looking Ahead Foundation, which is really helping create a community for kids. And I also do a lot of private coaching. So I'm very much see what's going on with kid actors. And boy, the lead actor on a show can really determine a lot in that young kid's life. With FESS, he was my dad for 6 years. I got to see him more than his own son Eli did. And for me, I lost my father when I was a year old in a plane crash, so he really was like an adopted father. And he was just nice. There were no egos on the set. If that happened, it got shut down real quick. So yes, his persona is absolutely that. Yes, it's very important, and I really thank him for that. I don't want to mention names on some of the bad shows, but they're out there and they're infamous. And yeah, especially as a kid, you look up and you kind of take your cue by how the other adults are acting. FESS always treated everybody with respect, and so that's the way I learned to treat other actors and stuff. And also my mom had a lot to do with it too. I mean, whenever I signed that contract, she always looked at me and said, no, you know, first of all, do you want to do this? Yes, of course I want to do this. You know, it's like Johnny Crawford talked about, yes, we're having fun here. And she always said, okay, but the minute you think you're special or better than any other kids, I'm kicking your ass off the series, just so you know that. I'm like, okay, Mom, got it. So my memory is he threw a party for us up in a house he bought up in Santa Barbara. Beautiful place, overlooking the ocean and everything, and all the cast and crew was up there. And I remember Swain, the cameraman, talking to him, and Fess, what are you doing buying up here? This is too far out of LA. No one's ever gonna come this far up. What are you doing? And of course, you know, it was Hope Ranch, which is like just, you know, gorgeous mega spot with, yes, he did very good in real estate, wonderful in hotels. Very hands-on. You know, it's funny, when I would walk around his hotel in Santa Barbara, if there was a little bit of litter somewhere on a walk or something, he would bend down, pick it up, and not say anything about it, but just bend down, pick it up, put it in his pocket. Knew everybody by name, and everybody loved him. And once again, that whole hotel had that feel about it. His inn and the vineyard he has, the lobby of it is built after Marcy, his wife's parents' home. And every Wednesday, Marcy and her folks would sit around the piano and sing. So every Wednesday up there at the lodge, Fess and a lot of the friends get up there and sing around the piano and just have a great time. And it was positive. And one of the fun things was I had Richard Dreyfuss play my older brother, who I can still hold it over his head to this day that he almost killed us. He was a New York actor that came in. They asked, can you drive a team of horses? Oh, sure, no problem. Of course I can. He didn't know which end of the horse to feed, okay? So we get up in this big buck wagon, and he's got a couple of horses in front of him. And I'm sitting right next to him, and I don't remember her name, but there was somebody else playing our little sister or something. But it was the 3 orphan kids that, you know, that was the story. But he's supposed to lead the horses in maybe 20 yards max, you know, stop, say the lines, you know, hold up and everything. So he's like, okay, I could tell he was a little nervous, but I'm looking at him. And they yelled action. He's like, the only thing he'd seen on television, yeah! So the horses take off, knock down lights, they're running out of control. Fortunately, there was a wrangler on a horse that, you know, caught up to us, jumped up, did the whole Lone Ranger, jumped off and pulled the horses back. So yeah, I can still hold that over Ricky's head. But Barbara was wonderful. You know, it's funny because I have a picture of me kissing her, which of course at the time I was probably 6 or 7 or something and didn't appreciate until you won't go and see a Double Indemnity or one of her shows. But I think that's why, you know, a lot of people ask me, why are you still in the business after all these years? Because it can be a little tiring at times, but you know, I started off in Jane Mansfield's arms at 6 months old. I'm kissing Barbara Streisand by the time I'm 6. Not Barbara Streisand, sorry. I'm kissing Barbara Stanwyck by the time I'm 6. The business has its perks. Once again, James and Artemis. I mean, when he did all the, you know, he'd come in the different costumes and stuff. But the fighting also was great. Because James would, you know, he'd throw a couple of punches, but he would pick up a barrel, or he, you know, it was a real barroom brawl, and just, it was a James Bond set back in the Western era. You know, they had things like nylon ropes, which hadn't quite been invented yet, but, you know, just the gadgets and the thing that, and there was another show that was my favorite too, was Al Monday, and It Takes a Thief. And I remember that was one of my first wow moments, is that I would watch his show and just, once again, nobody was cooler than him with the ladies and everything. And I went and visited the set one day. I was just very quiet, kind of by the camera, and I didn't think anybody would notice me or anything. You know, and there's Al Monday handcuffed around a gorgeous woman, and they're doing one of their typical scenes and all this. All of a sudden he sees me and he turns around and looks at me and goes, do they treat you like this on your set? And I was just like, oh, that's so cool. It's interesting. Like I said, every set has a little different flavor to it. What's going on, depending on, you know, who the director is, who the stars are. I remember I did an Owen Marshall attorney at law once, where I had to play a drug addict. I was trying to kicked the all-American Daniel Boone image. And it was fun because I really got to flip out with all the drugs and everything. But I had, that's what it was. Boy, see, I kind of pushed that out of my memory. But a couple of the older actors were messing around a little bit, and then so I kind of messed back with them. And it was either the AD or director turned around, hey, this is a professional business, and you know, straighten up. And I'd never had anybody talk to me like that on the set. I was like, okay. So I straightened up and did the gig. But yeah, it kind of depended. You know, if they knew you, if they didn't know you. I had a wonderful experience, and I didn't understand a lot of these kids that would say, first of all, they didn't even want to be there. And they would rebel against, you know, they do what they had to, but then, and I just didn't understand it, and I always stayed away from Where Are They Nows and doing all those. Yeah, actually the first fellow actor that got me involved with the kids and saying, all right, maybe I need to see what's going on out there, was the young kid from Ghost of Mrs. Muir. I was kind of dating Kelly Flanagan, the young girl, on it a little bit, and so, you know, I knew the show, I liked the show, I watched it, and you know, he was a good kid. And then, I think he was in his 30s or something, but he went back to his high school and took off his belt and hung himself on the fence with a note. What happened? Everybody used to love me. Everybody wanted to be around me. Now there's nobody. What's going on? And that kind of made me, because, you know, it is interesting. We talk about how much fun it is and how great it is. And yes, you get the perks and you go some places and the doors fly open. I was in every disco and nightclub from the age of 13 on. You know, they just let you in. They did it. Whether that was right or wrong, I don't know. It was one of the perks. But you can really get addicted to that fame, which to me is one of the most addictive, powerful drugs out there. And the real challenge is that once that's gone, almost immediately when the show's off, it might give you a few months, but all of a sudden, you know, the gate doesn't rise at 20th when you pull up to it. People just aren't treating you. People who thought they were your great friends and would do anything to be around you, all of a sudden they're not even returning calls. And fame is the one drug you can't go down to Hollywood Boulevard and buy back. You know, no matter how much money you have. Now you can do really outrageous things, hold up drugstores or, you know, to try to get a little of it back. But you can't buy what was given to you. You didn't even ask for it, but it was just kind of given to you. So that's one of the biggest challenges. And that's why I like the looking ahead that I do a lot for, because we really try to create a community for the kids. Because most kid actors now are homeschooled. So they don't even get to interact with other kids their age. Their social skills they don't really have. So that's our whole thing, is to arrange paintballing or just going to the movies and finding out that those other kids aren't your competition. They're doing a job too. But just to try to give them a little bit of normalcy. Like I say, I started when I was 6 months old due to a joke on my dad, because both my older sisters had started when they were a year old. And my dad was a working actor and worked a lot. And, you know, they would always ask him, well, what about your son? Is he going to work? Oh, that kid's a bum. He's 3 months old, hasn't earned a dime. Oh, he's 5 months old. He used to love to say that. Drove my mom crazy. So I got to go on Playhouse 90, like I say, in Jane Mansfield's arms. She didn't tell him about it, sat him down and said, oh, our friend's on the show, we just got to watch it. He watched it, looked at her, Marilyn, you sure know how to ruin a good joke, don't you? But that was it. From 6 months I stayed on. Then when I lost my father at a year, my mom was a little concerned, being a single mom with 2 older sisters. There weren't enough men in my life. So that's why she, you know, through acting, I got that a lot of male influence, and especially on the Boone set. I mean, our head prop guy was a scout, Boy Scout leader, and he would always show me all the things that because I didn't have time to go to regular Boy Scouts or something, but he always took time to show me. And I also got to do just about anything if there was some machoism behind it. If it was skydiving, racing cars, or whatever, you know, Mom was all for that, so I got to do it. You know, it's really interesting, because I just did an interview with Robert Morgan, who wrote a book on Daniel Boone. And, you know, in his interviews, he was putting down the Boone show constantly for all the lies and misconceptions, and it's just that fluff. And so it was fun to get to sit down and kind of give him a hard time on the interview. And then I was just back at Fort Boonesboro in Kentucky, filming something with my family, which I'm very, very proud of. And the head of the fort, and for the whole state park there, the Boone State Park, came up and said, you know, I just got to thank you, because it was that show that got the public's interest into Daniel Boone and gave the state the means to acquire all this land where the real Fort Boonesboro is, where the real, you know, house. And he goes, so I just really want to thank you. That show really helped. I was like, cool. You know, that's helped. If it makes people more aware of history, because it's a fabulous history, then more power to it. You know, what you really need to realize is that he's one of the reasons America is America. If the colonies had all been kept on this side of the mountains, between the mountains and the shore, the British probably could have squeezed us in, you know, won the war, and we'd all be, you know, hailing the Queen right now. But the fact that he found the trail that opened up the West, and then the Americans started spilling out into the rest of America, to where now the British had to go through Canada and come down and get Indians, and it was their resources that were stretched thin, the reason they didn't win. And besides the American fighting spirit, you know, it really was. And the fact that he loved to live in that gray zone. You know, he found Kentucky when it wasn't part of America. And then when that got too crowded for him, because he could see the smoke out of somebody else's cabin 5 miles away, so, you know, time to move. And then he moved into Missouri when it was owned by Spain. So he just kept pushing it, and wherever he went, everybody followed. Oh, Daniel Boone's here, let's go. So that's why they kept giving him land, because, you know, if you and your family settle here, then we know a lot more people will come. He was the first American living legend, because they would write these little comic books, I don't know what you want to call them, the dime store, but all through Europe they would have the adventures of Colonel Boone and the Indians, and, you know, even though, and back then too, he even talked about him as a real flight of fancy when they talked about him. So everybody always embellishes a little bit. But the fact that, yeah, he was known worldwide while he was still alive, very famous. You know, they talk about him in his own home when he was old. He didn't like telling the stories anymore, and he'd see a stranger walking down the street and go out the back door, because he knew people would come from all over the world just to talk to him and hear his story.
That's great.
And unfortunately, he wrote his own autobiography, because everybody else wrote stories about him. My son, you know, Nathan Boone, everybody. He wrote his own, and it capsized in a boat when he was bringing down a load of ginseng down the river. So we lost everything in his own words. But like I say, it's fun to talk to all the experts now and find what they think. Well, you know, when you talk about the popularity of the show, or popularity of myself, it's not as much ego as saying there were more eyes on the shows back then than there are now, because there was no video games. There were no, you know, even your cell phone you can't get away from now, playing games on and stuff. The entertainment was the TV, and on the TV there were 5 channels, 3 of which had new shows, 2 of which showed reruns. So on a Thursday night at 7 o'clock, there's a good chance that most of America was tuning in to watch your show. So that's why some of the shows back then have much more of a following and were more popular than any of the shows on today, just because they're not competing with the internet. They're not competing with the video games, or even movies were not as common as they are now. You know, you didn't have the Cineplex with 8 different movies in it. You would have one movie that would come out every now and then. So it really was a family thing. And like you said, the whole family could sit around the TV together and watch the shows. It was a great era. Well, because that is so American. You know, you can look at the, you know, the European, any of the other histories, but the American frontiersman, the loner, the one that would go out there and battle the elements and battle either the Indians or the Spanish or the French or the British, but just to conquer and take the land. I mean, it's such an American story that, yeah, even today, I think it inspires people, and it's very fun. However, having my wife now go through the weekend as a frontierswoman in Boonesboro, and they showed her all the things the frontier women had to do, my wife has decided that she definitely was not cut out for that. That just would not happen. Well, you know, I think a lot of the reason people love it is because, one, the art of television can take you to a time or a place that you wouldn't get to see. You know, you can't really go out to the West anymore, but through that show you could. It was a more gentle time. I mean, you know, and if you could take off 2 years just to go find some land that nobody else has done, most people now can't find a lunch to go have with a friend. But if you wanted to go visit your friend, it might be a 1 or 2 day walk just to go see him. And it was just a lot more carefree. Of course, there weren't as many rules. The government wasn't, you know, over you. You wanted something to eat, you go out and you hunt, and you bring it back yourself. So I think there really was there was that newness, there was that hope that, yeah, these poor settlers that are from all different places around the world, a lot of rejects from other countries, or people just trying to escape persecution from their own countries. Some people that were sold into slavery, they didn't even know they were sold into it. You know, they indebted. They didn't know what that meant, but we go over the new land and, you know, I'll work for a couple of years and be free. And unfortunately, I found out that didn't happen. But that all these people could come together and say, you know what? We don't need a king. We don't need somebody that owns our land. We don't need to pay a rent. They're giving us land. If we can go out there and settle it and put a cabin and start growing a crop, they're going to give us that land. So let's go do it. I mean, it was all that newness, that freshness. I really think that's the way it is. And, you know, and if you take it further to the Westerns, the Lone Ranger, you know, they could kind of step outside the law, but still was doing it for the right reason. And I remember I did a show with Clayton Moore, and he was wonderful. It was a show called How the West Was Fun. And they brought in all the old Western people from, you know, Ford to Bonanza, any Western show you could think of, they were there, even from Grizzly Adams. But I had a couple of scenes with Clayton Moore, the Lone Ranger, and it was just so interesting. All those years later, I don't know how many decades the show had been off the air, but it was a barroom scene, because of course it's a Western, it has to be in a bar. And there was a drink next to him. And he didn't say anything, but I just noticed he reached over and he slid the drink away from him. Because the Lone Ranger never drank. Because the Lone Ranger never drank. The only thing you would see him was with a glass of milk. And he still cared that much about his image that many years later. And then, of course, I think it was one of the cruelest things the studios did when they passed a law, or they gave him a restraining order that he could never wear that mask again. Because they had come up with the young Lone Ranger and they wanted to promote that as their movie, and they thought he would make it old and everything. And so they actually went and got a court order that said he could no longer wear that mask and make appearances. And here it was just such a part of that man's life. It's a shame. Well, the thing I get the most about the show, besides the question, did he really split that tree with one throw of the axe, is the fact that the fond memories they have of sitting around with the family, watching it. You know, back then, there wasn't a TV in every room. There was a TV in the living room, one, maybe two if you were really wealthy, but usually there was just one TV. So everybody would come together, sit on the couch and watch it. And then when it was over, they could talk about it. They could talk about some of the issues we brought up of slavery, of being New America, what it meant to be. Whatever it was, it started a family discussion. And now, it just seems that, and I'll speak from my own family, it's one of the reasons I'm doing the show, is to bring back the group and have us travel as a family and go see these places, is I think a lot of families, the kids are in their room, you know, there's a TV in the kitchen while mom's cooking, dad's in the office, and you don't have those occasions really to come together anymore. And even the shows that are very popular today, and I like them too, you know, like a House or something, I think that's great. But I'm not going to sit next to my 11-year-old daughter and watch it with her. And then some of the shows she likes, you know, I'll sit there for a couple of minutes and watch them just to be with her, but I'm not really into those shows, you know. I think Hannah Montana is very talented, but I don't need to watch the whole show. So there really right now doesn't seem to be that show that can just bring everybody together like that. And maybe it was a purer time, I don't know. Because it seems today that you really have to do things to shock people on the shows. And there's God, I'm really sounding like an old fart now. There's a lot more sex. There's a lot more things that people feel you have to do to grab the attention. And like you're pointing out, the Daniel Boone show was able to grab a lot of people's attention, and there was never a bare butt. Might have been mine when they gave me a bath once. But, you know, there wasn't that sexual tension or the dirty jokes or putting anybody down. So maybe that's what it was. Now there's more the anti-hero. Everybody has to show their flaws and what's not right or what's, you know, yes, he's a great cop. Unfortunately, he's an adulteress that, you know, whatever it is. You're right, it's flawed. And back then, Daniel was Daniel. He was a family man. He stood up for what was right or wrong. He would even go hunt down Mingo if he thought Mingo did wrong. And yes, there were the morals. And some of the fans that we have out there, I mean, in this last campaign, there was a whole Daniel Boone for president on the internet, just because of those moral issues like you talked about. And I think you're right. It's a great way to talk about the kids. And yeah, that's what you should stand for. And I would like to see a lot more of the positive attitudes out there, but right now it's not selling. Right now it's reality, and let's see how messed up people really are so you don't feel so messed up.